So as coaches, we want to build a selfless culture, one where people are about the team. So we often preach team first and we before me, but so often that's with lectures about making the extra pass or accepting your role. But we need to go deeper than that. A selfless team culture is one where everyone feels connected to the group. And that's a challenge to accomplish. But one of the coaches that I have seen who is one of the best at that is Sean Keating. Sean is a high school coach at St. Peter's High School in Minnesota who attended our retreat in 2019 and has been in the mentorship program and community since then. Now today he's going to talk about his own unique journey into coaching, how he builds relationships with his players, and how he gets players to connect with each other. Thank you for listening in to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name's JP Nerb, and I'm joined by my co-host, Nate Sanderson. And I'm excited that the next 2 weeks, we're going to be joined by Sean Keating, who is a good friend. This podcast, it's all about journeying together with you, our listeners, as we all seek to become more transformational in our leadership and build better cultures, which honestly is one of the reasons this interview is so special. Sean was just a listener 2 years ago, like yourself, and now he is a close friend and someone I deeply admire and respect. So let's get right into our conversation with Coach Sean Keating. So Sean, your journey into coaching was a little unusual. You used to work in a lab as a scientist, and somehow you ended up on the basketball court and in the classroom. Could you share a little bit with the listeners, a little bit of that journey?
Yeah, thanks for having me, JP and Nate. I think my story is a little bit different, but now that I've heard a lot of other coaches over the years, I know that everyone's kind of got a unique background. But for me, yeah, it was just a different journey. I played a couple of years of college basketball and gave that up and didn't get back into the game until later in my 20s and really, really missed it. And I come from a family that's very academically successful. A father who is a cancer doctor, a sister who's an eye surgeon, and a brother with a law degree. And my other two sisters have very successful brother-in-laws. Anyway, and so I kind of felt that pressure. And so I kind of went down that path and got a master's degree in microbiology and immunology and did some research for biotechnology companies for a few years. And actually, one of the best things that happened was we all got fired from our small startup, and was basically a reset in my late 20s, and kind of gave me that opportunity to chase something that I knew was kind of buried inside of me of coaching and teaching, and so I started being an assistant for a high school program, and really loved every part of that. And it really just dawned on me. I kind of had thought about going into college coaching, but the impact that I felt I was making with teenagers was really, really big. And it drew me to go get my teaching license and to start teaching and coaching at the high school level. And I was an assistant for 4 years, and then I've been the head coach at St. Peter here for 8.
As you kind of got into that coaching life, what were some of the early challenges? Obviously there's probably the financial challenge of going from, working at a startup and as a scientist there, but just some of the other challenges as you made that transition, because I think there's a lot of listeners out there on the podcast that are part-time coaches. They haven't really dove into it. They might be, having other careers, but they've definitely been tempted to jump in. So what were some of those challenges early on, and how'd you overcome them?
I think the biggest challenge for me was feeling not knowledgeable enough, and just feeling like I missed out on my college kind of basketball experience. I didn't coach right away, and I felt behind. And because I felt behind, it motivated me to work incredibly hard those first couple years. In the first year that I decided to get into it, I remember my dad bought me every single John Wooden book, and I read them cover to cover in like 3 months. I traveled the country, worked camps for a summer. I was a huge Don Meyer fan, and I went and saw him speak 3 times. And it's really crazy to see people that you don't, that you either read in a book or a podcast or a video that have such a gigantic impact on you. But I was in this like, kind of that sweet spot of learning that we sometimes talk about with our students or players. And like, I felt like I was in that for like 2 years of just incredible educational opportunities and learning from coaches. And I was just a sponge, and I wasn't there to ever speak. I was just there to listen and ask questions. And I felt in those first 2 years, being in my late 20s, still single at the time, it was a giant kind of time in my life, because I had turned down some pretty lucrative science offers all around the country, and decided this is what I wanted to do. And a lot of my family and my friends really thought I was kind of crazy. But I loved every stinking second of it. And as I look back now, 10, 11, 12 years later, it's one of the, fondest times of my life, when I was just all into just soaking up culture and the X's and O's and understanding the why. And I think as I started, I just didn't know what I didn't know, and I had to learn it from experience. Why can't I get these kids to do what I want? And so I think for me, it was just that feeling of inferiority and just feeling I wasn't good enough, smart enough. I haven't done this long enough. So I had a complex, and I think it caused me though to work really, really hard. We had somebody, a social worker the other day, that told me, like anxiety can work for you. And I had a lot of anxiety of just not being like, should I even be here? Like, should I even, what do I know? And I actually used that as a real positive. And I think it really helped accelerate my growth as a coach.
John, I appreciate you sharing that story. And I know part of your experience in learning was joining us for the retreat a couple of years ago. And that was kind of the first chance that JP and I had to meet with you and spend some time with you. And what if you could just share a little bit about kind of what that experience was like for you and how you ended up there? Because you were one of the guests that we didn't know previously. And then you came out and spent a few days with us. So can you talk a little bit about what that was like for you?
Yeah. So I had been a head coach for, I think at that time, maybe 5 years. And I really think the fact that I got into coaching a little bit later in life, I really understood my why when I got into coaching, because I had kind of figured out a little bit more about myself and what I wanted. And so I felt culture, and I felt, the Bill Walsh book, The Score Takes Care of Itself, really had a huge impact on me. And I don't even know how I started listening to your guys' podcast, but then at the trail end of it, it just said Park City, Utah. And I'm like, that sounds perfect. And every summer I take pride in going away by myself and just reflecting and trying to either meet with a coach or do an educational opportunity. And I find that changing your environment has a real impact. And so going out there and then finding a dozen like-minded coaches and people that are trying to be transformational really like struck a chord with me, because I pretty much had felt pretty isolated on that front. And then to be a part of that community and to see people that are going through the same things and trying to make a difference in young people's lives, really just gave me a lot of, I think it lit a fire, like even bigger, and learned so many things from yourself and from JP that have been implemented into our program here at St. Peter that have made a giant difference.
So one of the things that came from that retreat experience is that you kind of jumped all in with us, and you've been in the mentorship program now for a couple of years, and you've attended one of our workshops there in St. Paul. So how has that helped you along this journey? Because I think you mentioned one thing there, you knew your why. And I could tell that about you when I first met you. You really had a clear vision. You were already a really strong coach doing some really great things, which was awesome to have you there. And it's one of the great things about the retreat and, the community aspect of things is because, Nate and I aren't always the experts in the room on topics. You guys are in the trenches. You guys are having experiences. We learn just as much from you guys. So, but just how has the community and mentorship program been impactful for the last 2 years on your journey?
I think one of the biggest ways has been having almost like a little cheat code to some strategies and like practical things that are already there that we can use with our teams. Some of the things from just like how we did team meals changed so much. We used to have kids over and I'd make spaghetti and I'd make all the garlic bread and I'd serve them and we'd sit there and we never get to any real life discussions. And from some of those principles that you guys have shared, the TOC community, just having the players serve and having our units from the Captain's Council and asking some questions and sitting around our team meals have been amazing, and like sometimes gotten to some real deep personal conversations. And that's probably one of the things I missed most due to the pandemic, was just that we couldn't do that. I think along with that, just some short things with our practices, whether it's a quick roundup of players and asking them how they're doing and getting into their units. Those types of things have really had an impact. And then from just talking to you guys in the community, what I really appreciate is just having someone that can listen with like a tactful ear and understand what we're going through. And as a head coach, I learned this early on in my career. Another head coach told me, he just said, Sean, sometimes you're going to feel like you're on an island and no one else is there with you. And as coaches, we really feel that. And it's a struggle. And when you have someone else that can feel those feels of being on that island with you and has been there, it is just it's such a refreshing and motivating and comforting feeling and sense that you get from that. And it sounds kind of cheesy almost, that like that is something that makes that big of a difference. But for me, it really has. And it's almost validation and confirmation that it's going to be okay. And then we can take a step forward from there.
I think that's an interesting perspective. I was just a couple of weeks ago, did some professional development for an athletic department at the college level. And one of the things that I was trying to drive home to them is really the same thing you're sharing there, is that it's a unique experience being a head coach. Cody Royal in his book, The Tough Stuff, he talks about how nobody can really understand what it's like to invest in a kid for 4 years. And then his senior year, I have to tell him, you're not going to get to play as much as you thought, and like when you care about that kid and you've helped them to grow and you talked about their goals, and, like there's some really hard stuff that a lot of people can't really understand. Your spouse, your siblings, your assistant coaches. And I think that's the value, in some of the community experience that you're describing that we're trying to create here at TOC. I'm curious, Sean, at the retreat, we talked a little bit about, with my programs, we've done mental health Wednesdays. And I know that's something that you've kind of taken and run with your team. Can you talk a little bit about just how you've addressed, issues of mindset and confidence and some of that with your basketball program?
Mental toughness is something that I think is probably my most one of the biggest things I try to instill into our teams and our players. When I was in high school, for whatever reason, I just came up with a name for myself when I played called Mental Warrior. And I don't know if it came a little bit from WWF and all that, but I would write it on my shoes. And literally when things got really hard in the game, I would hit my head and I'd just be like, this is when mental warriors really show their resolve. And my brother was 7, 8 years older, and him and his buddy got cut off t-shirts with Mental Warrior on it, and they'd come to our games, and it was just kind of a way for me to dig in. And as a coach, I've really tried to give that to my players, and not just about on the court, but more importantly in life and with what they're dealing with. Kids deal so much with pressure, and pressure for grades, pressure to fit in socially, pressure to please their parents and their peers, and trying to give them the tools to understand how to deal with that pressure and find value in who they are as a person, and that they don't have to be somebody for somebody else. They can just be themselves. And so we talk a lot in our program about being yourself, being weird, Like if you're weird, like be weird, be you. We don't want to try to get kids to conform. We want kids to be themselves. And so we spend a lot of time trying to let kids express themselves, to be heard, whether that's in small groups through the units, whether that's through journaling. We did do mental health Wednesdays even before I'd come to the retreat, and we even made it bigger. And I think the impact it's had has been, we've built a culture of upperclassmen being with underclassmen. And when you give a ninth grader an opportunity to be heard by a senior, it changes them. And the feedback we have gotten from parents and from those ninth grade kids has been really, really impactful. They've found a place where they have not just their ninth graders, they play third grade, fourth grade, all the way up. But now they're in these kids they look up to, and they want to listen to what they have to say. And that's a pretty just huge thing for a 14, 15-year-old kid to have somebody they really look up to that wants to have a conversation. And then from there, when they see him on the bus or when they see him, walking in the halls, they have a high five, they have a moment. And I think that connection builds confidence. And I would say 4 or 5 years ago, I just realized in my coaching career that all we're really doing here is trying to get kids to have confidence in themselves. And everything we do at St. Peter is trying to build that up.
Sean, you did something really special at the end of this season with the seniors and the underclassmen, and being able to have a you kind of facilitated a dialogue there. I believe it was a lecture hall. Could you tell a little bit about that story? Because I think that's something that almost any coach can implement in some way within their program.
Yeah, we've done that last lecture in maybe a variety of questions in a variety of ways over the last few years. And this year I wanted to do it with everybody there. And so I had our entire program, 9 through 12, and I had our 6 seniors each have a moment up on the stage. We have a beautiful little theater and had a microphone, and they shared their story about things they've learned, what they wish they would have known as a ninth grader, challenges they've overcome. And then what was really cool was the Q&A time. So each kid, we gave a few minutes for anyone in the audience to ask questions. And, some ninth graders, some 10th graders, some underclassmen just relate to certain kids because they hear their story. For example, we had a kid that quit basketball after 8th grade, and he came out as a senior. And he shared his story about why and what was going on in his life. And it was just real. And then the questions afterwards were super impactful, and had parents and kids after that meeting just sending messages or coming up to me and just saying like how important that was, because now that senior is texting them or that senior is communicating with them. And in everything that we do in our program, kids feel so good when they're heard, and kids feel so good when they hear someone's story. And it's providing the platform to tell their story. And in today's day and age, it's not just the cell phone that's preventing that. It's that we're not being intentional about providing those opportunities. And in the classroom, the studies show teachers talk 85% of the time. And I'm sure as coaches, we do a lot of that too. I don't know what the percent would be, but that's really what we're trying to do is get the kids to be the ones doing the talking.
You do such a good job of that, facilitating those conversations and being intentional in that. I know we were just talking there a couple of weeks ago about some of the feedback you were getting from players in the program about their experience there. We just finished a 3-part series on identity within the identity of your program or your team. And I look at your program and I know you have a strong culture. There's a strong identity. If I were to ask one of your players, who are you, at St. Peter's basketball, ask them, what are you guys about? What would be some of the things that your players might say?
Yeah, it's crazy to realize that we've gotten to this point after 8 years, but going through this last season, the players really understand, like, it is about family, and it's not a tagline. It's not something on a shirt. Like it's real. They understand that character matters. They understand it's more about listening to your teammates and being aware when they're going through things and being intentional. And empathy. Empathy is what drives everything for us. Is we talk every day about putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Put yourself in the official's shoes. Put yourself into Johnny's shoes. Put yourself into Johnny's mom's shoes. And those are the things that we really talk about all the time. And none of it is ever about the scoreboard. None of it's ever about the wins and the points and all of that. That takes care of itself. But it's really cool. Even in a year, this year, we did not win a lot of games. But at the end of the season, like, we didn't have a bunch of disgruntled kids. We had a bunch of kids that felt appreciative that they were a part of this program. And I think one of the ways we do it is that, like, every senior that was a part of this program feels like they got a valuable experience out of it, and they feel that they were heard. And when they leave, they say it was their best experience of their high school career. And that is everything to me. That makes me feel like we've done our job.
That's just great validation for going all the way back to what we talked about before, starting with your why and the impact that you want to have on people, and then be able to see that fruit and to hear those stories told and shared is really powerful. I want to ask you this question, Sean. A term that JP kind of introduced me to a few weeks back is the concept of the shocking standard. You know, when you think about your identity and you think about, you know, the way that you've built your program, is there anything in terms of, maybe it's a ritual, maybe it's a custom, maybe it's a tradition, maybe it's just an expectation that's kind of communicates, you know, what you guys are all about in this one thing that we do that maybe is different than what a lot of other teams do? Is there anything that comes to mind when you think of what's a shocking standard for your program?
Yeah, I would say for us, it's just cleaning up after the game. And it sounds trite. Being a big Don Meyer fan and believer, when I started coaching, and I wrote down on one page when I'd become a head coach. And I think it was unique, again, going back to 4 years as an assistant, not starting till later. When I became a head coach, I was ready. Like, I had thought about everything. But being that I got into coaching a little bit later and had really thought about it, picking up trash was one of my 3 things when I came in. And I remember one bus ride, my first year, not my freshman year, but my first year, and there was trash on the bus. And so the next day we ran and we talked about it and all that stuff. And it kind of built its way over the last 8 years. But I'd say about 2 years ago, it got to a point where it was becoming something that opposing teams really noticed, because we don't just pick up our bench and their bench, but we pick up the bleachers, home or away. And so we have kids. It's like, where is Carter? Like, why isn't he? Well, he's still picking up the gym, coach. And they have taken it to a whole new level. And the custodians try to say, no, we got this. And our kids understand, no, we got this. And the number of emails and messages that we've gotten over the years has been really, really cool. And I always make a point to share those with our team and with our parents. And so I think that's definitely one thing. And then I think alongside that, I have a weekly email that we do every Sunday. And I think that's one way to share those stories with our parents, is to say, hey, I got this message from this coach or this fan or this parent. And we include that when I write my Sunday email. And I'm a little different in how I do that, because I probably spend normally an hour and a half crafting that on a Sunday morning. I get up early and that's how I start my day. And I found that to just be a great way for me to reflect on the week, and a great way to basically do the publicity for our program to our parents. It's not something you're seeing in the paper, but it's something that they're getting directly each week. And I think it really shows some of the artifacts and the evidence of what's going on within our program on a daily basis.
So in our next episode, Sean's going to be sharing with us how he took a transformational coaching approach and brought it to the classroom. He's got some powerful ideas on how to create a transformational culture and relationship with his students. In the meantime, maybe you've been thinking about taking that leap that Sean did 2 years ago and coming to our retreat this August. As of publishing this episode, we still have a couple spots remaining. This year's retreat, we are going to really do some deep dives into personality differences, narrative bias, trauma and the brain, and how to become a conversation artist. At the end of the retreat, you're not going to just understand yourself better, but you'll be more equipped to empathize with and relate to and build those relationships with your players. Heck, not even just your players, but everyone in your life. This retreat, it's an all-inclusive event that's very affordable. You can reserve your spot now by clicking on the link in the details of this episode or going to thriveonchallenge.com/retreats and clicking to reserve your spot.